Hello, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar called Strategies to Respond to the Continued Crisis of Long-Term Unemployment, hosted by the National Employment Law Project. For listeners who don't know, NELP is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that conducts policy research and advocacy in support of unemployed and low-wage workers. We're based in New York City, but we have offices across the country. And we partner with federal, state, and local lawmakers and advocates on a wide range of workforce issues, including, of course, unemployment insurance and the issues and concerns that unemployed workers face. My name is McKenna. I'm a policy analyst in NELP's national office in New York City, and my work focuses primarily on unemployment insurance. I'll be moderating this afternoon's discussion. So I just want to touch on, before we begin, a couple of administrative matters. So all listeners are on mute, of course, and during the first and then the third presentations today, I'll ask listeners to send me your questions via the chat function at the bottom left of your screen. I'll then be reading these questions to our panelists during the Q&A portion in the last 10 or 15 minutes. Please feel free to share the name of your state and any other professional affiliation that you think is relevant. So let's begin. So first, I just want to describe for listeners the labor market context in which the work and the recommendations of our presenters is occurring. So despite modest improvements in the labor market in recent months, pockets of significant weakness persist. So this slide compares key labor market indicators as of the latest month, September 2014, with their corresponding values in 2007. Most obviously, as listeners know, we're still facing a crisis of long-term unemployment. Despite drops in the unemployment rate, still more than 3 million people, representing 1/3 of all unemployed, have been out of work and looking for a new job for more than 6 months. In total, more than 6 million jobless workers are on the sidelines of the labor market, and this number comes from the Economic Policy Institute. Because so few good-paying opportunities are available, and were these workers to reenter the labor force, the unemployment rate would be 9.6%. And of those who are fortunate enough to be working, more than 7 million are working fewer hours than they would prefer. So these next two slides show the transitions of unemployed workers by their duration of unemployment from one month to the next. And I think it just provides a sort of deeper picture of long-term unemployment than the more standard measures. So this first slide looks at the share of unemployed workers who found jobs in the subsequent month. And the values plotted are yearly averages, and the 2014 value, however, reflects data through August. So I think a few things really stick out here. First, long-term unemployed workers are less likely than workers unemployed for fewer than 27 weeks to find work in the next month. Second, the share of unemployed workers who found jobs in the next month, regardless of their time out of work, has not fully recovered to the pre-2001 recession peak. And finally, and I think this will interest listeners most, since hitting their low points in 2009, the share of short-term unemployed who found jobs in the next month has recovered more than the share of long-term unemployed workers who found work. So this second slide on labor force flows of the unemployed shows the shares of unemployed workers by their durations of unemployment who quit looking and left the labor force in the next month. So with the exception of a few years during the recovery from the Great Recession, we see that long-term unemployed workers are more likely than short-term unemployed workers to stop their job search and leave the labor force the next month. Second, since the low points in 2009 for the short-term unemployed and in 2010 for the long-term unemployed, the share of long-term unemployed workers who leave the labor force in the next month has increased more than the share of short-term unemployed workers who did so. And so if we look to the right of the screen in 2014, 25% of long-term unemployed workers left the labor force in the next month, compared with 22% of short-term unemployed. So before we move to our main presentations, I do want to quickly review for listeners what have been the primary federal responses to the crisis of long-term unemployment. And the first, of course, is the temporary federal Emergency Unemployment Compensation Program, known as EUC, which provided workers who exhausted their regular state UI benefits between 14 and up to 47 additional weeks of unemployment insurance. And of course, this program expired at the end of 2013, unfortunately. And to date, an estimated 3.6 million long-term unemployed workers have been affected by this expiration. And of course, there have been efforts, as I show, to reauthorize the program. Unfortunately, none has been successful. And currently, there is bipartisan legislation pending that would pay benefits prospectively for 5 months, but we have seen very little movement on this measure, obviously. So the second response comes in the form of a package of federal financial incentives to states to either enact work-sharing programs or to expand and promote existing programs. For those who don't know, work-sharing is intended to assist employers during periods of reduced demand, such as during a recession. Basically, employers reduce the work hours of a set of employees in lieu of laying them off, and these employees then receive a partial unemployment insurance payment to make up for the lost earnings. Unfortunately, work-sharing has really never reached its true potential in the United States, most especially compared to European countries. So, for example, in 2009, the year layoffs peaked in the U.S. Just 17 states had programs, and weekly payments in those states represented less than 1% of regular UI claims nationally. In 2012, as part of the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act, fortunately, Congress passed federal legislation that set national work-sharing program standards, and offered federal grants to states for implementing new programs and for expanding existing programs and for stepping up promotional activities across the board. To date, 26 states, including D.C., have passed the conforming state legislation necessary to claim approximately $70 million in work-sharing grant funds, but this means that still 27 states have not, which leaves about $30 million in grant funds unclaimed. And I do, although it's hard to see for some reason, want to just promote the forthcoming work-sharing paper from NELP, so please look out for that. So this last slide mostly reflects, I guess, what you could call federal inaction on behalf of unemployed workers. Some of you may be aware of our nation's primary reemployment program, the Employment Service. It was established in 1933, 2 years prior to the UI program, and at its core is a free public labor exchange function in which employers list job openings and job seekers apply for positions that they qualify for. And ES staff members facilitate matches using their knowledge of local labor markets and the needs of employers. The EES also ensures that UI claimants maintain an active job search. Yet despite ongoing labor market weakness, not to mention a pretty significant body of literature documenting the effectiveness of the kinds of staff-assisted services that were once the program's hallmark, the ES has been struggling with essentially flat funding in nominal terms since the mid-1980s. As a result, unfortunately, states have moved away from staff-assisted job search services to sort of self-service and group-oriented approaches. Recently, Congress has expressed interest in an initiative that combines in-person checks that claimants are meeting work search obligations with called reemployment eligibility assessments with reemployment services. And it is, I think, attractive because it's presented in the in the context, of the administration's ongoing effort to minimize UI improper payments. But it's a sort of similar approach to the ES where it's suitably funded. And so, considering all of this, I think that the work of our presenters, who we'll finally get to, is of course very relevant and important. So our first presenter is my colleague Rebecca Dixon. She's a senior staff attorney at NELP. Her work focuses on unemployment insurance, and she also coordinates the UI team's state technical assistance. So today she'll be touching on a few areas of NELP's work on long-term unemployment, focusing on connecting long-term unemployment insurance recipients and exhaustees to other social services, as well as discussing various job creation strategies. Emily Allen is our second presenter. Emily is the Vice President for Income at the AARP Foundation. Through a variety of means, the foundation helps low-income people ages 50 and older regain their economic footing. So today she'll be walking through some of the challenges that unemployed older workers face, as well as discussing the foundation's partnerships with workforce services providers. And finally, our third presenter is Ofer Sharone. Ofer is an assistant professor in the Institute for Work and Employment Research at the MIT Sloan School of Management and co-founder of the Institute for Career Transitions. Ofer's research focuses on career transitions, job searching, and unemployment, and his recently published book features his research findings on the job search and unemployment experiences of white-collar workers in Israel and the United States. Unfortunately for us, he'll be discussing those findings and the work of the Institute today. So without further ado, I want to move then to our next presenter, Rebecca Dixon, who will begin.
Hello, everyone. So to set some context, I just want to talk a little bit about the hardship that long-term unemployed workers are facing. The Rutgers-Heldrick Center has been doing surveys throughout the recession and actually asking questions of a cohort of unemployed workers and long-term unemployed workers. They recently did another survey, and here are some of the findings. When you look at the last 5 years based on their survey, one in 5 workers is still looking for a job. So that's a pretty huge amount of people over that time frame. We also see that workers were also more likely to receive long-term unemployment benefits when you look at 2009 to 2014, and they exhausted at around the same rate that they received them without finding another job. But when you compare the current unemployed workers who are receiving unemployment benefits, you see that only 38% receive benefits, and a full 83% of those workers lost those benefits before they were able to find a new job. Another finding for these workers is that the jobs that they do find are almost always lower paying, or often they're temporary work jobs. And these workers, their outlook is very pessimistic. Nearly half of them say that it'll take them 3 to 10 years for their families to recover financially, and another 1 in 5 think it'll take longer than 10 years or they'll never recover. So we all have witnessed the UI program and how it's been able to prevent poverty throughout the recession. On this slide, you'll see the number of children kept out of poverty from 2007 to 2013. As you can see, it peaked in 2009 with nearly 1 million children, and it's slowly been trailing off. And these numbers have been falling because unemployment has been falling, but they've also been falling because several states have pared back their unemployment benefits from the basic 26 weeks down to as few as 12 weeks. And we've also seen the emergency benefits were also pared back before they expired last winter. So with such a huge reduction in unemployment benefits, what else is available for workers, and have they accessed it? So one issue is that UI is the biggest piece of the safety net for unemployed workers, and other programs are less robust and really aren't targeted at this population. We've also seen that workers may be unfamiliar with whatever is available, since lots of the workers in the recession had never experienced a layoff before. In the Heldrick Center's survey, which this chart comes from, you can see that only 9% of long-term unemployed workers say that they received any help from a government agency while they were looking for a job. It's really important for workers to have help searching for jobs in order to get back in the labor market quickly. And only 4% say that they were enrolled in a government-funded training program. We also see that only 28% of the long-term unemployed received assistance from the food stamp program, now known as SNAP. So in the fall of 2012, NELP released a paper which put together an action plan to help America's long-term unemployed. And to give you some context, at this time, we had just seen that between 2007 and 2012, an estimated 6 million workers exhausted their benefits. And roughly half to three-fourths of those workers arrived at the end of those benefits without securing a new job, despite considerable work search efforts. Only a limited portion of them actually accessed any other safety net programs. So what follows is a collection of state best practices in connecting workers to new jobs and basic needs support. So the first piece is for states to pursue job creation strategies. And one of the strategies that we've seen that's been very successful is subsidized employment. Several states and local governments have developed financial incentives to encourage businesses to hire disadvantaged and long-term unemployed workers. By temporarily subsidizing those workers' wages, these programs help businesses grow and create jobs that wouldn't have otherwise existed. And it also reconnects these workers to the labor force. They have to overcome a tremendous stigma that's associated with unemployment. So these wage subsidy programs, because they have such a tangible benefit for workers and employers, they've been popular across the political spectrum and with businesses. Recent research has shown that unemployed workers are becoming discouraged and giving up on the labor market. One of the reasons for that is that businesses routinely discriminate against unemployed workers in hiring. And experimental evidence shows that these workers, once they reach 6 months of unemployment, face a dramatic decline in callbacks, even if they're more qualified than other candidates. So there'll be more on that in one of the forthcoming slides. So as you can see on this slide, there are some programs that are examples that have successfully done reemployment with subsidized employment. And I'm pretty sure everyone's aware there was a federal funded program from the Recovery Act, the TANF Emergency Fund, where states used that to successfully employ 260,000 workers. So there's more information about these programs that were in the examples in one of the papers that's in the resources section, which we'll get to as the last slide. So states also should expand access to on-the-job training and other model programs that have been targeted to help the long-term unemployed. So in the workforce system, we know now that that's called the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act with the reauthorization. So states have been successful in using these programs. Washington State couldn't participate due to scheduling conflicts, but they've been a leader in helping the long-term unemployed from the very beginning. In their long-term unemployed program, they have received training funds to support workers in high-demand fields through a $6 million national emergency grant from the Department of Labor. This 2-year grant adds on to a $4 million federal funds that they've already allocated to address long-term unemployment. Together, they expect to put some 2,400 Washingtonians back to work through these initiatives. Another state example is New York State, which has received $6.4 million in federal funds and to offer businesses training support under the on-the-job training NEG program. So that's another successful example. Another thing that's very important for states to do is to track workers who are exhausting and then target outreach to them to connect them to these other resources that are out there besides unemployment insurance. And one of the first steps is for workers to reach this, to have this outreach before they reach the end of their benefits, because state agencies aren't funded to do anything with them after they've exhausted benefits. So any kind of coordination has to be done before they exhaust benefits. Agencies should also track and report the number of unemployed workers who are running out of benefits and their ability to collect other benefits and their reemployment opportunities and status. In our paper, the action plan, which was from 2012, there's a lot of detail on what states did and a really nice appendix that showcases some of their survey instruments and outreach tools. So you'll find a link to that in the resource slide. So state agencies really should send notices to workers They should also enter into memorandum of understanding with their social service agencies and share data. States have taken the step of phone banking their workers, and several of these states are really good examples of how to connect workers to programs. So states should also maximize coordination across state and local agencies. This is related to the previous slide. And as you can see, there's two really good examples in Washington State and Connecticut where the state took on the role of bringing their departments together to put together a solution for these workers. And we can see when states break down silos, they are really able to give long-term unemployed workers comprehensive help. Because it can be really difficult for workers to find a job or searching for work if they have issues with transportation or if they're facing a disconnection of a utility bill or something of that nature. So the comprehensive assistance is really crucial. And the other thing that states should do as they're doing this, they should look to programs that are flexible and connect these workers to those programs. So one of the big programs that workers have accessed in this recession as they've exhausted their unemployment benefits and while they're receiving unemployment benefits is the food stamp program. So about 20% of unemployed workers accessed that program in 2010 versus only about 2% of workers accessed the TANF program, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. So we see that there are things that states can do to make it more likely that workers will apply for and qualify for SNAP benefits. And one other thing I wanted to touch on is housing. More than half of long-term unemployed workers live in owner-occupied housing, and they need to be connected to available programs so that they can keep their homes. So there are forbearance programs and loan modification programs available for these workers. So the last step is to minimize barriers to reemployment. And those two big barriers are credit checks and discrimination against the unemployed. So as you can see from this graphic, courtesy of Demos from their report, unemployed workers are really getting hit hard by credit checks. Unemployment, especially long-term unemployment, can be a fast track to poor credit. And these workers are caught in a catch-22. They can't get a job because of their damaged credit, and they can't escape the debt because they can't find a job. So states should enforce and expand laws that prohibit unfair use of credit checks. And finally, states should do whatever they can to stop discrimination against the unemployed. So NELP has been working on this issue since 2011, and there's a lot of detail on the slide about what's happened. There has been a commitment from 300 businesses through a White House initiative to have better HR practices when it comes to hiring the long-term unemployed. And as you can see, several states and localities have passed laws to get at the problem. So this final slide is links to some of the resources that I referred to in the presentation. And I look forward to your questions. Next, you'll hear from Emily Allen.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. It's great to be with you all, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this issue. You know, obviously, being with AARP Foundation, we're particularly interested in how long-term unemployment is impacting older adult workers. So obviously, we focus on those in particular that are ages 50 to 64. And, you know, the fact that it seems like the idea of long-term unemployment has somewhat fallen off the front pages, but, you know, we want to have a consistent drumbeat that, in fact, workers of all ages, but in particular older workers, are really being, you know, continually impacted by the issue of long-term unemployment. So today I kind of want to give you a little bit of a sense of what that picture looks like right now for older workers, and then some of the things that we're doing with internally here in AARP Foundation and across the AARP enterprise to ensure that, as you talked about, Rebecca, you know, practices and strategies are being put into place across the workforce systems to ensure that older adults are not being left out of the conversation. So I'm going to use the slide as well here. And it really, what this does is really helps you understand the impact of long-term unemployment and the number of weeks unemployed for an older adult as opposed to those who are under the age of 55. So we're using 55 as a framework here. But as you can see, kind of at the height of the recession and coming off the recession, we had major issues of older adult workers having significant longer periods of time out of the workforce than their younger counterparts. At the height of it, you were looking at well over a year of unemployment on average. While that number has come down and, we're looking somewhere in the neighborhood of 41 weeks on average now, it's still impacting a significant number of people across the board. At the foundation, we are really focused on, as Claire mentioned, we're really focused on helping those who are lower income secure opportunities to generate income and protect and maintain their financial assets. What I'm particularly intrigued by with the long-term unemployment issue is it really touches all of the issues that the foundation focuses on. We have 4 impact areas. I happen to head up our income impact area, but we also focus on issues of housing and mortgage foreclosure prevention, as well as hunger issues and isolation. And the long-term unemployment issue really is one of those that touches all of them. You heard from Rebecca and Claire both around the integration of our SNAP work, ensuring that individuals who have lost jobs are gaining access and are applying for SNAP benefits. Certainly we know about the issue of long-term unemployment and job loss and the impact on housing and people being able to afford their housing costs or being able to pay their mortgage. And so we really look at this as that kind of common thread across all of our impact areas. We also look at the issue of isolation, quite frankly, because as people have lost jobs, they've lost networks of people that they used to rely on for support. And so what are the strategies we can put into place to address all of those issues? But again, the clear picture is that, as of September 2014, about 43% of older job seekers were in long-term unemployment and had been out of work, that is, had been out of work for more than 27 weeks. More than half of older job seekers have been among the long-term unemployed at numerous times during the recession, and right now older workers aged 55 to 69 made up about 19% of long-term unemployment in 2014, which is up from about 12% in 2007, so a significant increase. So as we look at who, we talk about long-term unemployed workers, but I think segmenting that to understand better who those workers are and then developing the strategies that are needed to address the particular needs of different age segments within the workforce and the long-term unemployed is really critically important. We've done some research over the past couple of years and have really found that there's a number of common issues that face older workers and those in long-term unemployed. One is the lack of awareness of relevant services. In some cases, they don't know where to turn for support and for help. They're not familiar with the public workforce system. The idea of going to a community college or other type of workforce services partner seems foreign to them or kind of out of reach for them. So it's really important as we're thinking about it, how do we just build awareness of relevant services in communities to address their needs? As I just mentioned, there's intersecting and interrelated crises. As you're thinking about trying to find a job and present yourself best to an employer, you may be facing losing your home, not being able to pay for your child's college, having to have your child drop out of school, things like that. So addressing the fact that, yes, these individuals need help getting back into the workforce is critically important, but so are addressing and understanding the needs that are going across the board. We do see, in fact, among older workers that there may be a lack of skills for jobs in demand. There may be times when perhaps an industry left a community or a major employer shut down in a community. And so how do we build skills and make training and the idea of education affordable and relevant for older adults? There may be, in fact, a lack of appropriate financial products, services, and capability. A lot of people are going through different issues right now. They've wiped out their savings. They may be living on credit cards. And so how do we address not only the fact that we need to get people back to work, but also help them build the financial capability to address and mitigate some of the circumstances that they find themselves in. And then the final one really is the fact that it's really not rocket science, but the fact of the matter is, yes, you can try to find a job online, but more and more individuals need help and personal guidance and assistance. That high-touch model is expensive and can present challenges for scale, but that one-on-one approach or that need for personal assistance and guidance is just across the board a common theme among older workers who are searching for work. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about how we've used that research that we've done and packaged it in such a way that is really helping us work more closely with workforce services systems that are already out there. With our Back to Work 50 Plus program, our theory of change really focuses on building key collaborations between key partners that really strengthen that bridge between that job candidate, that individual who is long-term unemployed, and at the end of that pipeline has to be an employer. And we really believe that by strengthening the workforce services systems that are out there, the public workforce system, the workforce investment boards, as well as community colleges and nonprofits that are in this space, that together we can really have impact. In our program, we really target and reach 50-plus individuals who are seeking, full-time jobs. Here it says hourly wage, but we really are across the board. And we start with the fact that you've got to market to them. If all brochures and flyers have younger individuals and younger faces in it, then in fact that older adult may not feel that those services are relevant. We've got to link them to programs that build financial capability, offer job coaching that really gets at that personal connection and that personal assistance to help navigate through job search strategies and connect them with employers. Increase access to short-term training. We are finding that older adults, struggle with the idea of, getting back into quote-unquote school, but if we can find and target shorter-term training opportunities that really connect them to locally in-demand jobs, then it increases, obviously, their success rate. And then, the employer has got to be part of the whole dialogue. Rebecca and Claire kind of referenced some of the programs that are going on around stipended, short-term training opportunities with employers. And I think that it's a great way to get employers engaged, but we've got to really work it at both ends. The other thing, as I mentioned, that we've got to not just focus solely on the job search piece of it, but the fact that individuals who have been in long-term unemployment have really struggled with their living circumstances. And so even if they do get reemployed, if we don't help address some of the issues going on around rebuilding their savings, addressing the issues of debt, then they will continue to live kind of paycheck to paycheck and struggle to get by. We're very excited. I think one thing, I kind of wear two hats. I wear a program hat, but then I also wear a funder hat. We do provide grants to different organizations, and we're very excited that we've just received a grant from the Social Innovation Fund to really build out key elements of our work. But most importantly, I can't reiterate enough the idea that organizations really need to put more and more toward evaluation. I think we have some great best practices. I think we have some promising practices and preliminary to moderate evidence around what works to really get long-term unemployed back to work. But I can't encourage enough to continue to evaluate, collect that data, and evaluate what's happening so that we can really put into place those strategies that are going to work across the board. So I'm just encouraged by this conversation and very much look forward to sharing our results. We are currently in about 20 locations working with workforce investment boards and community colleges to implement the model and begin to evaluate more deeply. And I think we will learn a lot from this effort in order to really inform the strategies going forward. And I think with that, I am now going to very pleased to turn it over to Ofer Sharone, who I've had the great pleasure to work with over the past year, really, on this issue and support their work, as well as have a great convening a few months ago on this very important topic. So with that, I think I'm turning it over to you, Ofer.
Thank you, Emily, and good afternoon to everybody. So I'm going to speak about both my research on long-term unemployment and some work to support long-term unemployed job seekers that's been supported by the AARP Foundation, as Emily mentioned. And I'm going to get beneath some of the numbers, talk a little bit more about what is the experience of long-term unemployment. I focus on professionals, and what are the implications of understanding that experience for the kind of support that may be helpful. Okay, so unemployment, particularly white-collar unemployment in the United States, is this double crisis. It's the financial crisis, how do I pay my bills, not lose my house, everything that we heard that the Rutgers study shows so clearly. But there's also a crisis of the self, this self-blame, the idea of something may be wrong with me. Is extremely pervasive, and even at the height of the Great Recession, when we had 10% unemployment, and it was the big news story. Even at that time, surveys were showing that a majority of people were feeling this, who were unemployed. This kind of fear that something may be wrong with them individually. So, why should we pay attention to the emotional toll of long-term unemployment? I wrote a book on this, and so I want to make the case that there is a tremendous toll, that it really does matter, and then to think about what we can do about it. So is self-blame important? So first of all, it's a very significant personal crisis. When I do in-depth interviews with unemployed, particularly long-term unemployed job seekers, they tell me that it's often the hardest thing, feeling something is wrong with me, or my self-esteem is killed. It also connects very much to the job search discouragement, and we heard from Rebecca or Claire, I can't remember who talked about the huge drop in labor force participation that we've seen. I think very much related to the emotional difficulty of continuing to be out there and getting rejected. And then to those of us who think that some political mobilization is ultimately required to get structural reforms of the labor market, the self-blame issue is very relevant in helping us understand why we're not seeing the politicization of this, and actually we see the privatization of the issue, which impedes any kind of political progress on it. So how do we understand the self-blame? The kind of traditional academic literature has been focusing on the American culture of individualism. We as Americans can't really think beyond how we as individuals are responsible for everything good and bad that happens to us. And this is kind of an old view, but one that's challenged by many more detailed current empirical work, where you ask people to describe their careers, and they have plenty of structural explanations as well as individualistic ones for what's going on. So people do talk about outsourcing, and they talk about the economic downturn, and in some cases immigration. We don't just have one cultural narrative for understanding career outcomes. So it's a deeper question about why do we see so much self-blame among job seekers in particular. So cross-national comparisons help us. We can see things that are taken for granted here to be unique and particular as opposed to universal. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about what's distinct about job searching in the United States for professionals through a comparison to Israelis, which make for good, I won't go into the methodological reasons why I chose that case, but we can talk about it in Q&A. But basically, the Israeli pattern is I'm not getting a job because the system is a meat market, or some other reference to how the system of hiring is not really evaluating me fairly. The American pattern is much more, it's phased. The first phase is I'm not getting a job because I'm not good at interviews, I'm not good at networking, something about my job search capacities. And then for the long-term unemployed, it gets much more insidious with this feeling of I feel like I'm flawed in some way, like I have a character defect. So how do we explain it, and then what can we do about it? The explanation I'm going to offer has to do about job searching practices which relate to hiring practices. So just I'm going to call the hiring system in Israel the specs focus system, and the one in the United States chemistry focused, or the chemistry game. And these relate to how people understand their difficulty in finding work. In Israel, when you ask people about why are you still unemployed, basically, why is it difficult for you, they say things like, and what does it take to find a job? I'm sorry, what do you need to take to find a job? They'll talk about they need to meet the employer's checklist of skills or qualifications, or the proxies used by the employers, which are often perceived as unfair. You know, things like age is used as a proxy for skill, very unfairly, of course. In the United States, you hear what really takes to get a job is establishing fit with a particular employer. So skills, of course, are understood as important, but as a threshold issue to get into the pool of consideration. But the real action in the search is to establish your fit. It's the person behind the skills where the real focus is. And this has to do with how hiring happens in the two places. I'll just focus more on the U.S., the centrality of networking and the need to build rapport while networking puts that interpersonal chemistry out in front in people's understanding of what it takes to get a job. And interviews, hiring managers' interviews, we know, use this kind of chemistry filter, tell me about yourself, questions that try to get at who is this person as opposed to really only trying to understand their skills. So these differences shape the search, which in turn shape the search experience. I'm going to give you just a couple of really concrete examples, like something as mundane as how you write a resume, right? So the Israeli approach to the resume is it's the product specs. How the resume is written does not matter. What matters are the skills. Either you have them or you don't. Whereas in the U.S. case, much more typical response is this. Each resume requires switching language, transforming the code. You have to indicate you're aware that they have a certain culture and that this is your culture. We see this in every aspect of the search. Cover letters in Israel are attached, please find my resume. In the U.S., these are exercises where you're really trying to reveal aspects of the self that will make you seem like the perfect fit for the employer. So this goes, again, beyond just skills to the person's self. In interviews, Israelis describe these as oral exams. In the United States, the more typical metaphor that's used is of a first date, where you're truly trying to establish connection. You might find ways in which you can interpersonally connect with the interviewer. If they have a picture of skiing on the wall, you might talk about why you like skiing as well. So now let's think about this chemistry game that job seekers play in the United States. It depends on their self-presentation, particularly the projection of some kind of inner qualities that will establish fit. And to establish this kind of chemistry really requires putting yourself out there, in a way putting the self on the line every time you apply for a job. You know, so if you listen to job search coaches or read any book on job searching, it's all about putting yourself out there through networking, through connecting during interviews. And so it's a highly personalized process in a way that it's not in Israel. And Israel you can think of as a stand-in for really Western Europe and many other countries as well where I present this research. So we have a distinct process of finding jobs which personalizes it. So in short, in the United States, particularly for white-collar workers, repeated rejections in the context of the chemistry game leaves them feeling exposed, very personally exposed, and rejected. Israelis feel invisible. It's a whole different experience. It's not an easy one. But the implications of understanding the relationship here between hiring practices and unemployment experiences means that unemployment is not a generic universal experience. It's one that's local and understood, needs to be understood in relationship to a whole range of context. And it also means that the experiences are not inevitable. This is not just psychological truths, right? So we can think about what kind of institutional interventions can make a difference. Particularly, I want to highlight how unemployment experiences vary with the degree to which job seekers' self is implicated in the evaluative process, very much so in the American chemistry game. And as I said, self-blame is therefore not inevitable. So now all this leads me to ask whether we can find ways of supporting long-term unemployed professionals in a way that can both help them find jobs and mitigate the emotional toll of the process of looking for work, and these two are very interconnected. So last year, to deal with this, we founded the Institute for Career Transitions, supported by the AARP Foundation, and I mentioned, thank you, Emily. And so basically what we did is we got career coaches and counselors in the Boston area who agreed to provide 3 months of pro bono support to 100 long-term unemployed professionals. All of them were at least 6 months unemployed. All of them were at least 40 years old as our requirement, but it turned out that the people who came were mostly over 50 years old, reflecting Emily's discussion about the relationship between age and long-term unemployment. So one of the questions we had, a very basic one, is does help, this kind of help, one-on-one or small group support, make a difference for people in finding work? Arguably, you could think it makes no difference because we know there's very strong institutionalized discrimination against people who are long-term unemployed through applicant tracking systems. Some of my colleagues' research shows it. But yet, because of the emotional toll, because of how difficult it is to continue to search and to search in optimal ways, I suspect that there would be a difference and there would be some meaning to the support, and it turns out there is. So here we can look at a couple of points in time. 3 months, after 3 months of support, we see that job seekers receiving support, 30% of them found full-time work or long-term contracts, so 4 months or longer. While the control group who got no support, 18% of them found such work. 5 months later, we broke it out a little more. This was just recently completed, so we can see that with full-time jobs, we have 46% among those who got one-on-one support. The group support did a little less, 38%, and the control group, 33%. So again, if you think about this difference between 33% and 46%, and you think about the scale of long-term unemployment across the country, that is a huge difference, a huge number of people that, if this scaled out, could be back at work. So let me just finish with tying it into the emotional toll. We also asked, do you agree with this statement? I fear there's something wrong with me. Prior to the support, across the board, 61% of everyone said yes. After 10 weeks of support, we can see a split. So the control group, it went up. More people said, I fear there's something wrong with me. Among those supported, it went down. Small samples, I don't hold too much to these particular numbers, but the trend, I think, is really suggestive. Why does support help, particularly with the self-blame issue? Job seekers understand they're not alone. There's others who are really qualified, who are in the same boat. They are able to generate an internal counter-narrative to the one that says something is wrong with me by having someone else help them see their own skills and strengths. That is a huge contribution made by coaches. And the support mediates the experience, particularly it mediates the black hole, which job seekers constantly talk about, where they send out applications for months and hear nothing, and increasingly feel there must be something about me. Here they're getting feedback weekly, being told that they are making progress even if there's no response yet in the market, along lines of networking better, writing better cover letters, etc. So that feedback is crucial to maintaining resilience. And I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ofer, and thank you to all the presenters. The presentations all featured a lot of really excellent content, and I do want to remind listeners that we will make available the presentations in the next day or so. We don't have too much time for questions, but I'll just start. I'll start with one, and this is sort of addressed to the group, but NELP is trying to contemplate a more thoughtful employer outreach strategy. And Emily, you mentioned how important it is to engage employers in your presentation, and I think, Ofer, you would probably have thoughts on this as well. But I'd love to know what you would recommend, as far as a process of reaching out to employers, of sort of getting to have them understand how serious a problem, long-term unemployment and all these other issues noted are to them and to everyone. So Emily, I would put it to you first, and others if you have thoughts.
Sure. Yeah. No. Happy to. Actually, I would take slightly a different tact. I don't think I would approach an employer with necessarily, this is the issue, and you've got to help us with this and that kind of thing. You've really got to. Our focus is always on approaching the employer with what is the value add to the employer of ensuring that within their community or wherever they're trying to recruit individuals is what's the value add to them of ensuring that they have the absolute most qualified employees possible or candidate pool possible. So I think that's kind of one of the challenges is we so often think of whether it's an older worker or long-term unemployed or whatever, it's like, well, we got to approach employers about helping us with this problem. And actually, the reverse should happen. We should really position ourselves as helping the employer with their problem of recruiting the best talent possible. And so I think that's part of getting workforce services partners involved, community colleges, others, to ensure that we are, in fact, can say that whether you're long-term unemployed or not, that you possess the skills that are in demand by employers, and then work with individuals, as I pointed out and Ofer did, to build up the confidence in individuals so as they approach employers, they are really presenting themselves in the best light. But I think there's such opportunity for different workforce services partners to really work with employers to be part of solving the employer's problems, not the employer solving the problem of long-term unemployment.
So if I could just add to what Emily said, I completely agree with her approach. And I think one type of research we have, which I think is potentially compelling to the employers on the issues they care about, is the Rand-Gayad type research, which shows that systematically employers are inviting for interviews job seekers with less qualifications and less relevant skills than long-term unemployed job seekers who have better matching skills. And that, I think, can begin to speak to employers about, hey, potentially our processes are not leading us to find the best available talent. At least when Emily and I were both at the White House when President Obama rolled out this initiative for companies to sign on to the pledge for stopping discrimination. And one of the things that came out in conversations there was when the CEOs were gathered in the room and shown these kind of studies, they all acted shocked, and as they should be, that they're missing out on talent. And they contacted their HRs and said, "Is this really going on?" And HR kind of indicated that it's complicated, and it seems like this is the issue: is at the HR level, but that the CEOs could be mobilized to exert more pressure on HR to change some of these screening processes that are so hurtful.
I also, NELP has for a long time been trying to sort of mobilize unemployed workers to sort of build a movement driven by unemployed workers. And you mentioned, Ofer, that this sort of self-blame really impedes this mobilization, and you sort of at the end kind of are making recommendations to sort of kind of reverse these issues. But I guess I wonder if you could sort of speak a little bit more to this issue of kind of mobilizing unemployed workers and sort of, how do we implement the recommendations you're talking about on a wider scale and get politicians to really pay attention?
Really difficult issue. So unemployed workers are very hesitant to put themselves out in public as unemployed,
right?
Because they are fully aware of the stigma. So it's hard for me. I get reporters all the time wanting to interview long-term unemployed workers I work with, and they don't want to be interviewed. They don't want to go on the record with their real name. So I think I don't have a great answer for this. I'm thinking that some support that is linked to raising awareness about the structural obstacles involved could be a first step. So to the extent you decrease self-blame, shift the focus to an understanding of institutions that are problematic, and doing so in group settings, I think it will require a lot of on-the-ground work. We're planning to do a long-term unemployed job seeker boot camp in May, which will precisely aim to do this, both talk about individual level strategies and also talk about what we might do as a community and a collective. So we hope to bring in a couple of hundred long-term unemployed job seekers and try to have this dialogue precisely. But I don't think anyone yet knows how to exactly mobilize this group, even though there are millions of them, and it's really, really urgent to do so.
Yeah, Claire, this is Emily. If I could kind of speak to that,
sure.
I think it really takes multiple approaches, and I agree with Ofer. I mean, it's hard to get people to raise their hand and say, yes, I'll talk about this, because their top of mind is for them to seek employment. One way that we did it is really to take kind of a multi-pronged approach, and one approach we took was actually supporting the distribution of a great documentary. If you haven't seen it, it would be, I would well advise you to take a look. It's called Set for Life, and it really focuses on three individuals, takes deep dives into three individuals' lives who have been in long-term unemployment, who happen to be over 50. It's from Tree of Life Productions, and it was built off their multimedia platform called Over 50 and Out of Work. But it's a great documentary. It goes across the board and looking at a lot of individuals. And we have gotten some lift around providing that to employers, to workforce services partners, and actually even to politicians to see. It's a way to show them what's happening without putting on the spot an individual who happens to be in this circumstance. So I really highly recommend. We underwrote the Set for Life documentary to be shown on the public broadcasting stations across the country, and have really gotten great feedback on it as a way to highlight the issue without making someone in the spotlight.
Thanks, Emily. Rebecca, did you have any parting words before we say goodbye to listeners? It's 3:00 now.
I would just invite folks to try to use this information as best you can. One of the best ways to keep this as an urgent matter and to keep it in the eyes of federal policymakers and state policymakers is for each of you who work in states to raise this issue and to take some of these best practices back to the relevant folks and see if they're interested in doing them in your state or piloting them in your state, or just making sure that they're aware that these things are out there. And if you have any questions about any of the stuff I presented, or you need more details about any of the state examples, definitely feel free to reach out and I will get you whatever I have.
Great. Thank you.